I'm your host, Kim Hollingshead. And on today's program, we're talking about, non-individual Tennessee resident owners of real estate. How big of a problem is it really that we know that, 2.5% of America is owned by mostly Canadian, Norwegian, not Germans. But, let's talk about corporations. Nationally, the large institutional investors, they own well under 4% of all single-family homes in the United States. If we listen to Elizabeth and we listen to Bernie Sanders, it sounds like this is just a giant problem. Whoa. They only own less than 4% of all single-family homes. Well, the GAO found that the biggest 32 investors only held about 3% of the entire single-family rental market in 2022. That's actually really small numbers. But that small national number hides a really big local number because that's the whole argument. It's not spread out across the entire country evenly. For instance, let's take a look at our neighbor, Memphis. Institutional investors actually make up about 4.4% of all single-family purchases over the last decade. That is the highest of any metropolitan area in the United States. You can find that statistic at Realtor.com. I believe it was posted in March of 2026. Another city, Atlanta, about a quarter of single-family rentals are institutionally owned. And here in Nashville, one estimate actually puts them around 2.2% of the local stock, much lower than the average, the national average, about half of the national average. Be careful with the scarier numbers that you hear because many people will sweep in every every flipper. They pretend like everybody who's buying and selling investment property is somehow corporation. No, a small LLC or a single member LLC is not a corporation. They shouldn't be swept into those numbers to make it look like it's this giant, big national problem because it's not. They are individuals who are, the vast majority. We're talking like over 95% of all residential real estate rentals in the United States are owned by people. They may be held in an LLC. That does not mean that these are large institutional corporations versus Wall Street. It's not a huge problem. So, when someone's like counting up these numbers for you, you just need to really figure out where they're getting these numbers. I mean, some of them are just super inflated. But basically, the hardest is not the average home. It's the entry-level starter house. And this is exactly the price that we know that first-time home buyers are going to be wanting. So when we hear about how FHA loans and first-time home buying is down, but then we also hear that corporations are buying up these homes, it does, this leaves a bad taste in our mouth. We're not huge fans of that, We want to make sure that homes are available for first-time home buyers and not for institutional lenders, right? Because we don't want young families to be like priced out of the market. Basically, first-time buyers in 2020, they had an all-time record low of only 21%. I mean, that's terrible. So how did Wall Street even get involved in real estate? Why would they do that? Well, after the 2008 crash, they bought up all these REO properties in bulk. And they learned that they could bundle these rental properties into securities and run maintenance at this huge national scale. So that's where the single-family rental market actually came from in the United States. So just like how they will bundle up mortgages, they're now bundling up single-family rental homes. We see a lot of stuff online about certain people advocating that you should not be buying a house, but you should just be renting a home. And it makes you question who's paying these influencers online. Why is it that, who does that benefit? Why would an influencer go online and advocate their listeners to do something that's going to damage them financially, for many, many years to come? That doesn't seem right to me. What seems right is probably that person is being paid some kind of a salary or some kind of a fee to put that message out, it's like, well, who is that going to benefit? In the long run, that benefits Wall Street. So it does not really make a lot of sense to me. Now, look, we do have some good news here because the 21st Century Road, ROAD to Housing Act, which is a huge, all in all caps, the 21st Century Road to Housing, it just passed Congress. So there's a huge bipartisan majority for the passage of this statute, which was, I thought, absolutely brilliant. We know that President Trump did not sign it. He allowed it to pass, under the Constitution, and it became law, but he didn't sign it because he's holding out for his Save America Act. It's to make sure that there's voter reform in the country. And because the Republicans in the Senate have not been motivated, he wanted them to be focusing on that and not focusing on this bill. So that's the reason why he didn't sign. But regardless, because starting in January of 2027, which is just right around the corner, a for-profit entity that controls at least 350 or more single-family homes is going to be completely barred from buying any more of them, with the exceptions of build to rent, meaning that a who goes in, buys land that's entitled, or they entitle it themselves, and then they build those units to rent. And then there's going to be certain debt situations where it makes sense for them to continue to buy, but it doesn't force anyone to actually sell their inventory. They get to keep whatever it is that they already own. It's only looking forward into the future. But the whole provision, it basically sunsets in 15 years. Yeah, this is not a statute forever into the future that they'll never be able to, have Wall Street firms buying up real estate again. It's just a 15-year moratorium on it unless it is renewed. So, why is it that Congress actually wanted to do this? It's such a good question. And basically, the reasons are going to be different for Democrats, because Democrats like Senator Warren, what she focuses on is stopping private equity and getting homes back into families instead of to corporations, because, that's her big thing, is that she hates corporations. But Republicans like Senator Tim Scott, he frames it around homeownership as a foundation of family stability and keeping property in the hands of local people. Now, they have different reasons for why they wanted to pass the law, but at the end of the day, this law is definitely worth celebrating, because what it does for us is that it actually helps us just slightly, because we have to be really realistic in the fact that they only own 2.2% of the homes in Davidson County. So it wasn't a huge problem here for us to start with, but in markets like Atlanta, it's going to be a major, major impact for that market. It's just going to remove that competition, and it's going to help, people in one specific price band. So it's not an across the board assistance. Basic home that's already been bought, and it will not touch single-handedly owned real estate, meaning that, individual accounting for over 90% of the buyers of rental properties in that price point, they're still not going to fix affordability on its own. And so when we hear people definitely go pull up the clips, because you're gonna see. We talk about discernment and truth telling, and that's the reason why the show is called The Real Deal. It's called that for a reason, because we're not here to hype, we're not here to front, we're just putting out the real news. I think that a lot of people who are in real estate and would encourage homeownership, they might be on their radio show going, oh yeah, we have, making it a bigger deal than it is. In actuality, it impacts Middle Tennessee in a very, very small way. But I encourage all my listeners to actually go back and listen to the politicians talking about this, and you're going to hear them, drop these phrases and make it sound like they are the heroes for the American public, when why didn't they do anything about, other types of real estate then? Why is it just this? Well, probably because they're pandering to their constituents and making it sound like they're the hero and they're going to fix affordability in this market. My suspicion is that that's the reason why it had such bipartisan support, because neither side was going to let the other have that win by themselves. So they all passed it together. Anyways, it is definitely a real law. I'm glad to see that it was passed. I do think it's a good thing generally for the American public. So when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about, while we see Wall Street, this is some smartest money in the world. Think about it. Smartest investors in the world. They spent almost 2 decades buying houses, buying residential real estate. So what does that tell you about owning one yourself? When we come back from the break, we're going to talk about renting versus buying, honestly, and we're going to talk about why it's actually easier today than it was in 1981. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Real Deal. Don't go anywhere.